$412,000. That's what disappeared from a charity called Hearts for Our Heroes over 3 years. Money that was supposed to buy wheelchairs for wounded veterans. Money that was supposed to pay rent for a widow who'd lost her husband in Afghanistan. Money that came from people like you. $20 here, $50 there, birthday fundraisers, corporate matching gifts, a retired school teacher's entire Christmas bonus. Instead, it paid for a lake house in Michigan, a leased Mercedes-Benz GLE, 2 trips to Cabo San Lucas, and a closet full of designer handbags that a federal prosecutor would later hold up, one by one, in front of a jury. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm the person who found out. I wasn't a forensic accountant. I wasn't a private investigator. I was a donor, a small one at first, who made the mistake of asking one too many questions. And that question turned into 18 months of digging through tax filings, bank statements, and a woman's carefully constructed lie. Her name is Diane Whitfield. She thought she'd covered every track. She thought a fake charity was the perfect crime. No victim would ever come looking, because who audits a charity that claims to help veterans? She was wrong, and by the end of this story, she'll be facing federal wire fraud charges, a forfeiture order for every asset she bought with stolen donations, and a prison sentence that a judge will call a betrayal of the most vulnerable trust in our society. This is how I found her. This is how I built the case that put her there. And this is how you can make sure it never happens to you. Every week on this channel, I tell you true stories about financial predators, the con artists, the fake charities, the Ponzi schemers, the people who look you in the eye and steal everything you have. And every week, we follow the same rule. Greed doesn't get the last word. Betrayal gets answered. And every single dollar, traced, documented, clawed back. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been with me since the beginning, you know what's coming. Paper trails, bank records, and the moment the fraud finally cracks wide open. Hit subscribe before we start, because this story has more twists than almost anything I've covered, including a discovery later on about where some of that stolen money actually went that I promise you will not see coming. Let's start at the beginning, before I was an investigator, when I was just a donor who wanted to help veterans. In the spring of 2019, my younger brother Daniel was 2 years out of the Army, still adjusting to civilian life, still carrying pieces of 2 deployments he didn't talk about. I wanted to do something that mattered, not just a check written into the void. I wanted to find an organization that actually put money into the hands of veterans who needed it. That's the vulnerability, if you want to call it that. I wasn't naive. I researched things for a living. I worked in marketing analytics, spent my days pulling apart data sets for a living. But grief and love make you skip steps you'd never skip at work. I wanted this charity to be real so badly that I stopped asking the questions I should have asked on day 1. I found Hearts for Our Heroes through a Facebook ad, clean website, a Meet Our Founder page with a photo of a warm-looking woman in her 50s, Diane Whitfield, standing next to a wheelchair-bound veteran at what was captioned, "Our 2018 Adaptive Housing Ceremony." The site listed a 501c3 determination, an actual EIN number, which I now know most people never bother to check. It listed partnerships with 3 well-known regional VFW posts. It had a Charity Navigator badge, though, and this detail matters later, the badge was just an image file, not a live link. Diane didn't ask for money right away. That was the first thing that should have told me something. She asked me to follow the page, share a post about a veteran's story, comment "sending love," small, cheap, emotionally loaded actions that cost nothing and built a relationship. Psychologists call this the foot in the door technique. You get someone to say yes to something small, and they become far more likely to say yes to something big, because now they've invested identity in the cause. By June, I donated $100. Diane personally emailed me a thank you note within 2 hours, not a form letter, a note that referenced my comment about my brother. Thank you for supporting Daniel's community, Sarah. Men and women like him are the reason we do this. That personal touch is expensive to fake at scale. Most scammers don't bother. Diane did. It's part of what made her so effective, and part of what later made her so easy to track once I knew what to look for. Looking back, there were at least 5 red flags in those first 4 months, and I want to walk through every one of them because if you're watching this and you've ever donated to a small charity online, you need this list. Red flag 1, no independent financial transparency. Hearts for Our Heroes had a financials page on their website, but it was a single infographic, a pie chart claiming 89% of every dollar goes directly to veteran programs. No linked IRS Form 990, no audited financial statement. A pie chart is not a financial disclosure. A real charity of any size files a Form 990 with the IRS every year, and that form is public. I didn't check. Red flag 2. Urgency-driven campaigns. Every 6 to 8 weeks, there was a new emergency. We need $8,000 by Friday for Marcus's wheelchair ramp. Only 72 hours left to help the Rodriguez family avoid eviction. Real charities run capital campaigns and ongoing programs. Scam charities run emergencies because emergencies short-circuit your due diligence. You don't research when someone tells you a person will be homeless in 3 days.
Red flag 3, vague program outcomes. I never once saw a photo of an actual completed wheelchair ramp, a receipt, a thank you video from a veteran using his eyes and full name. Everything was described in aggregate. We've helped over 200 families this year, with no way to verify a single instance. Red flag 4, Diane's personal brand was bigger than the organization's. Her Instagram had 40,000 followers. The charity's own page had 6,000. That imbalance is a signal that the cause exists to feed a personal platform rather than the other way around. Red flag 5, the one I feel worst about. A friend of mine, an accountant, told me in August 2019 that she couldn't find Hearts for Our Heroes in GuideStar's nonprofit database. I asked Diane about it. She told me we're mid-transition between fiscal sponsors while our own 501c3 status finalizes. Should be fully searchable within the month. It sounded plausible. It was a lie. And I let it go. By October 2019, I wasn't just a small donor anymore. Diane had invited me into something called the Founders Circle, 12 donors who each committed to giving $500 a month for a year, in exchange for quarterly video calls with Diane and priority updates on specific veteran cases. I said yes. I told myself this was different from a one-time gift. This was a relationship, accountability built in. In reality, it was the opposite. It was Diane building a small, loyal, invested inner circle of donors who would defend her instinctively if anyone ever asked hard questions, because we'd already convinced ourselves we knew her. Over the following 18 months, I personally gave $9,500 to Hearts for Our Heroes. Across the 12 members of the Founders Circle, records I'd later obtain showed total contributions of $187,000, just from that one small group. Combined with general public donations, corporate matching programs, and 2 golf tournament fundraisers, the total raised between 2018 and early 2021 came to $412,340. At the time, I believed almost all of that was reaching veterans. I had no idea that I was about to become the person who unraveled exactly where it went. The first real crack appeared in March 2021, during what should have been an ordinary Founders Circle call. Diane mentioned almost in passing that the charity had moved its administrative office. When I asked where, she gave the name of a town in Michigan I didn't recognize, nowhere near the charity's stated home base in Ohio. I didn't think much of it in the moment, but 3 weeks later, a woman named Renata Osei reached out to me directly through the Founders Circle group chat. Renata's husband was a Marine veteran who Hearts for Our Heroes had sponsored for a wheelchair-accessible van in late 2020, a story Diane had shared publicly, with before and after photos and a heartfelt caption about giving Corporal Osei his independence back.
Renata told me, quietly and carefully, that they never received a van. They'd received 2 phone calls from Diane, a single $600 payment toward a used vehicle they ended up financing themselves, and then silence. And that's when I found the smoking gun, or at least the first one. I asked Renata if I could see any paperwork she had. She sent me a screenshot of a text from Diane, promising the full $14,000 sponsorship for the van, dated November 2020. I compared it against a public Facebook post from Hearts for Our Heroes, dated 3 days later, thanking donors for helping the charity fully fund Corporal Osei's new mobility van. Mission complete. That post had 340 shares and raised, based on the fundraiser thermometer graphic attached to it, just over $16,000 in 4 days. $16,000 raised, $600 delivered. That gap, roughly $15,400 on a single case, was the first hard number I could actually document, cross-reference, and hold on to. Not a feeling, not a suspicion, a number with 2 independent sources, Renata's screenshots and the charity's own public fundraising post. Once I had one confirmed gap, I started quietly reaching out to other veterans and families who'd been publicly named as beneficiaries on the Hearts for Our Heroes page, 11 cases going back to 2019. I want to be precise here because precision is what eventually mattered to federal investigators. Of the 11 cases I could identify and contact, 7 families received nothing at all, despite being named in specific fundraising campaigns. 3 families received a partial payment, averaging around 12% of the amount publicly claimed to have been raised on their behalf. 1 family did receive the full promised amount, a detail that turned out to be strategic. That single, fully funded case, a wheelchair ramp costing $3,200, became Diane's go-to proof whenever anyone questioned her legitimacy. "Just ask the Hendersons," she'd say, and the Hendersons, understandably, only had good things to say. Added up, and across those 11 documented cases alone, the gap between money publicly claimed to have been raised and money actually delivered came to roughly $96,000. That's not the emotional damage. That's not the trust damage. That's 11 veteran families who believed, because Diane told the internet they'd been helped, that their community had shown up for them, when in most cases it hadn't. I want to pause the financial numbers for a second, because the emotional damage here was its own kind of theft. Renata told me that after their van fundraiser succeeded publicly, friends and extended family stopped offering to help, assuming the Oseis were taken care of. Corporal Osei, who had already struggled to ask for help once, told his wife he'd never ask anyone for anything again. Diane hadn't just stolen money from Renata's family. She'd stolen their community's continued support, and she'd stolen a wounded veteran's willingness to ever trust an offer of help again. For me personally, there was a different kind of cost. My brother, Daniel, had started volunteering informally with Hearts for Our Heroes, helping at 2 of their events, believing in what he thought the organization stood for. When I eventually had to tell him what I'd found, watching his face change from pride to something closer to grief was honestly worse than losing my own $9,500. I did what most people do first. I tried to handle it quietly and directly. In April 2021, I emailed Diane a specific, factual question. Could she send me the itemized breakdown of the $16,000 raised for Corporal Osei's van and explain the $600 payment versus the $14,000 promise? Her response took 4 days. It was 2 paragraphs of warmth and vagueness. Administrative costs increased, the vendor situation changed. I'll have our bookkeeper follow up with exact figures. No bookkeeper ever followed up. I escalated. I requested in writing the charity's most recent Form 990 and a general ledger of the Veteran Assistance Fund for 2020. Diane stopped responding to email entirely and instead called me, a tactic I now recognize as classic damage control, since a phone call leaves no written record. On that call, she was hurt, almost tearful, insisting I was attacking the mission over one misunderstanding with one family. She told me the Founders Circle group had always trusted her and asked whether I really wanted to be the person who tore that down over an accounting error. That call is when I stopped being a donor and became an investigator. Within 2 weeks of my written requests, 3 things happened that at the time felt like coincidence and that I'd later prove in a spreadsheet were not. First, the Hearts for Our Heroes website quietly removed its financials infographic page entirely. I only know this because I'd taken a screenshot of it back in 2019, and I noticed the URL now returned a 404. Second, Diane restructured the organization's public messaging, rebranding several past campaigns as General Operating Support, rather than named individual beneficiary campaigns, which conveniently made it far harder to trace any specific dollar amount to any specific unfulfilled promise. Third, and most significantly, Diane dissolved the original Ohio registered nonprofit entity and within 4 months filed paperwork in Michigan for a new but confusingly similarly named organization, Hearts for Heroes Foundation. Same mission language on the website, same photos in several cases, different EIN, a brand new legal entity with no public track record, meaning no bad Google reviews, no history of complaints, and functionally a clean slate. This is a pattern financial crimes investigators call shell shuffling or phoenix activity, dissolving an entity that's drawing scrutiny and reincorporating under a near-identical name before regulators or the public catch up. It's the charity fraud equivalent of a scammer changing phone numbers. By the summer of 2021, Diane Whitfield believed she had successfully buried the old organization's problems along with the old organization itself. She had no idea I'd already started building a folder. I want to be honest about where I started. A shared Google Drive folder named HFOH Questions, a spreadsheet with 3 columns and absolutely no idea what I was doing. What I did have was a professional habit from my day job: never trust a single data point, always triangulate. So instead of trying to prove Diane was lying, I set out to build an independent timeline of the organization using only public and verifiable records, the same way I'd build a marketing attribution model at work: pull every source, timestamp everything, and let the gaps show themselves. Step 1. IRS Form 990 filings. Nonprofits with over $50,000 in annual revenue are required to file a Form 990 with the IRS, and these are public. I searched GuideStar, now Candid, and ProPublica's Nonprofit Explorer. Hearts for Our Heroes, the original Ohio entity, had filed exactly one 990 for fiscal year 2019, reporting $61,200 in total revenue and $58,900 in program expenses, a suspiciously clean 96% program ratio, especially compared to the actual delivery rate I'd documented with the 11 families. For fiscal year 2020, the year of the largest fundraising volume, no 990 had been filed at all. For an organization that size, that's a compliance failure serious enough on its own to trigger IRS scrutiny, but the IRS doesn't proactively chase every missing filing. Someone has to flag it. Step 2. State charity registration records. Ohio, like most states, requires charities soliciting donations to register with the Attorney General's Charitable Law section. I found Hearts for Our Heroes registration and its listed officers, Diane Whitfield as president, and a treasurer named Kevin Marsh, a name that had never once appeared anywhere on the charity's public-facing website or social media. That name was the second smoking gun. Step 3. Cross-referencing Kevin Marsh. A basic search connected Kevin Marsh to Diane through a shared address, a residential property in Ohio, and then later a second property in Michigan that matched almost exactly the geotag I found buried in the metadata of a photo Diane had posted from what she'd captioned as a board retreat at a lake house. Kevin Marsh wasn't a treasurer running independent financial oversight. Based on public property records and a marriage license I located through an Ohio County Clerk's searchable database, Kevin Marsh was Diane's husband.
That's not automatically fraud. Plenty of small nonprofits have married co-founders, but it is a massive governance red flag because it means there was effectively no independent financial control at all. The person authorizing disbursements and the person receiving them could be the same household. I couldn't subpoena bank records. I had no legal authority to do that, but I didn't need to because Diane had made a mistake that a lot of fraudsters make. She'd used a personal Venmo and a business PayPal account, both publicly searchable, to accept some donations directly, bypassing the charity's official donation processor for smaller gifts, easier for everyone, as she'd once written in a group message. Venmo transactions between users are by default public, unless privacy settings are changed. I found dozens of donations from Founders Circle members, including my own, sent directly to an account under the name D. Whitfield, rather than to Hearts for Our Heroes, Inc. Small gifts individually, $25, $50, $100, but across the Founders Circle and general donors over 2 years, I was able to document roughly $34,000 in donations that went to Diane's personal Venmo, never touching any charity bank account at all. That's not a bookkeeping error. That's not administrative costs. That's money that was solicited as charitable donations, publicly promoted as going toward veteran programs, and deposited into a private individual's personal payment account. By late summer of 2021, I had enough documentation that I knew I couldn't sit on it, but I also knew I couldn't just post it online and hope for the best. Diane was skilled, sympathetic on camera, and I had no formal legal standing. A public accusation without ironclad documentation could just as easily blow up on me. So I did 3 things simultaneously. First, I filed a detailed complaint with the Ohio Attorney General's Charitable Law section, attaching the missing 990 filing, the Venmo screenshots, the Corporal Osei fundraiser discrepancy, and my full family-by-family accounting of the 11 cases. Second, I filed a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission through their consumer complaint portal, since charity fraud that crosses state lines and uses electronic solicitation, email, social media, online payment platforms, can fall under federal wire fraud jurisdiction, which meant this wasn't just a state civil matter anymore. Third, and this took the most courage, I reached out directly to a financial crimes reporter at a regional news outlet who had previously covered a similar charity fraud case. I didn't ask her to publish anything yet. I asked her to review my documentation and tell me honestly whether it held up. Her answer, "This isn't a gray area. This is a case." Here's the part of this story that still makes my stomach drop. In September 2021, roughly 6 weeks after I filed my complaints, Diane announced, publicly, cheerfully, that Hearts for Heroes Foundation, the new Michigan entity, was pausing operations to pursue a strategic partnership with a larger national veterans organization, and that all current donations would be held in escrow during the transition.
At the time, I didn't know if this was a coincidence or if word had somehow reached her that questions were circulating. What I know now, from later court filings, is that it wasn't a coincidence at all. Diane had been contacted informally by an acquaintance on the original charity's board, someone I had also reached out to for comment, who tipped her off that someone was asking a lot of pointed questions. Diane began liquidating. Court records later showed that within that 6-week window, she sold the leased Mercedes-Benz back early, incurring an early termination fee she paid in cash, and wired $61,000 from a business account into an account held under Kevin Marsh's name alone. If she had stopped there, closed the organization quietly, gone dark on social media, walked away, this might be a very different story. Charity fraud investigations, especially ones built by private citizens without subpoena power, often die at exactly this stage. The money moves, the trail goes cold, and there's no case left to make. But Diane didn't stop, because 6 weeks later, in November 2021, Hearts for Heroes Foundation relaunched with a brand new campaign, a $50,000 fundraising goal for a veterans housing initiative, featuring a heartbreaking story about a homeless female veteran in Grand Rapids. She went right back to the well, and this time, because of the state and federal complaints already filed, the Ohio Attorney General's office and an FTC-referred investigator were already watching. By January 2022, my role shifted from lead investigator to lead witness, an investigator from the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, which has jurisdiction whenever fraud involves solicitations sent through the mail or interstate wire, including much online fundraising, contacted me directly. Charity fraud that uses electronic payment processors across state lines frequently falls under USPIS or FBI jurisdiction because it qualifies as wire fraud under federal statute. Over the following 4 months, I handed over everything: the spreadsheet, the Venmo screenshots, the missing 990 documentation, my correspondence with all 11 veteran families, and detailed timelines cross-referencing every public fundraiser against every dollar I could prove was actually delivered. Investigators, using actual subpoena power I never had, obtained the real bank records behind everything I'd only been able to circumstantially document. What they found exceeded even my numbers. And that's when I found the real smoking gun, the one that turned this from a strong civil case into a criminal indictment. In August 2022, a federal grand jury in the Northern District of Ohio indicted Diane Whitfield on charges including wire fraud and money laundering tied to the interstate electronic solicitation and misuse of charitable donations across both the original Ohio entity and the Michigan-based Hearts for Heroes Foundation. Kevin Marsh was named as a co-defendant on related money laundering counts based on the transfers into his personal accounts. Federal prosecutors, using subpoenaed bank records spanning both organizations' full operating history, documented total fraudulent proceeds of $412,340 raised between 2018 and late 2021. Of which investigators traced only about 31%, roughly $128,000, to any legitimate, verifiable veteran assistance. The remainder had gone toward the Mercedes-Benz lease, 2 trips to Cabo San Lucas totaling around $22,000, mortgage payments on the Michigan Lake House, and, this detail actually appeared in the prosecution's exhibit list, $34,000 in designer handbags purchased across 11 separate transactions, several within days of major fundraising campaigns closing. The case went to trial in March 2023. I testified for just under 3 hours, walking the jury through the same spreadsheet I'd built at my kitchen table 2 years earlier, the same 11 families, the same Venmo screenshots, the same missing 990. Renata Osei testified the following day about Corporal Osei's mobility van that never fully materialized. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Diane Whitfield was convicted on 11 counts of wire fraud and 3 counts of money laundering. Kevin Marsh pleaded guilty to a single money laundering count in exchange for testimony against Diane, avoiding trial. In July 2023, a federal judge sentenced Diane Whitfield to 7 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release, and ordered restitution of $412,340, the full amount prosecutors could document as fraudulently solicited, plus a criminal forfeiture judgment covering the lake house, the remaining designer handbags, and roughly $61,000 recovered from the account Diane had wired money into during her September 2021 liquidation attempt. At sentencing, the judge said something I've thought about often since. This was not simply theft. This was theft that weaponized this country's respect for its wounded veterans as a marketing strategy. That is a particular kind of betrayal, and it deserves a particular kind of consequence. The forfeiture process took another 11 months to fully resolve. The lake house sold at auction for $340,000, with proceeds directed into the restitution fund administered by the U.S. Attorney's Office. The Mercedes had already been resold by the leasing company after Diane's early return, so no additional recovery came from the vehicle. The recovered handbags sold at a government surplus auction for a combined $19,400, a fraction of their original purchase price, which is typical for forfeited luxury goods. Combined with the frozen bank funds, roughly 68% of the total restitution amount was ultimately recovered and distributed, first to the 11 documented veteran families whose promised assistance never fully arrived, and second on a pro rata basis to the broader pool of general donors, myself included. I personally received $6,460 of my original $9,500 in donations back. Not everything, but far more than I expected when I started this. Renata and Corporal Osei received the full $14,000 originally promised for the mobility van, paid out of the restitution fund, plus a small additional amount covering the interest they'd paid financing the used vehicle themselves. The story also made regional and eventually national news once the sentencing came down. The reporter I'd originally reached out to broke the story with full documentation, and 2 national consumer protection outlets picked it up shortly after, using it as a case study in charity fraud red flags. Financially, getting back $6,460 mattered less to me than I expected it to. What mattered more was something harder to put a number on. I stopped donating impulsively. I now check every charity I give to against ProPublica's Nonprofit Explorer and Charity Navigator before giving a single dollar. I ask for a Form 990 as a matter of habit, and I never ever send a charitable donation to a personal payment account, no matter how easier for everyone it sounds. My brother, Daniel, to his enormous credit, turned his own anger into something productive. He now volunteers exclusively with a veterans organization that publishes fully audited annual financials, and he personally reviews their filings every year before renewing his involvement. Here's the detail that honestly still gets to me more than any of the numbers. During discovery, prosecutors found something in Diane's financial history that predated Hearts for Our Heroes entirely. In 2016, 2 years before founding the charity, Diane Whitfield had run a small home staging business that failed, leaving her and Kevin roughly $180,000 in personal debt, a mix of a second mortgage, business credit lines, and a defaulted SBA loan. The fake charity wasn't just casual greed, it was, at least at the start, a debt servicing operation. Financial records showed that in the charity's first 8 months of existence, before a single major campaign had even launched publicly, roughly $22,000 in early donations went directly toward paying down that pre-existing personal debt, not toward the lake house, not toward vacations, but toward digging out of a hole Diane and Kevin had already fallen into on their own. It only escalated into the lifestyle spending, the Mercedes, the trips, the handbags, after that initial debt was cleared, and Diane realized, based on how easily the money kept coming, that no one was checking. It doesn't make what she did any less of a crime. If anything, prosecutors argued it made it worse. It meant Diane understood from day one exactly what she was doing and exactly how to hide it, because she'd started with a specific, deliberate financial goal, rather than stumbling into fraud by accident. But it's a reminder of something I now say in almost every video on this channel. Most financial predators don't start out as monsters. They start out desperate, and they discover that other people's trust is the easiest currency in the world to steal. So here's what I want you to walk away with. Not just the satisfaction of watching Diane Whitfield face a federal judge, but the tools to make sure you never end up funding someone's Mercedes lease when you think you're funding a wheelchair ramp. Warning sign 1. No linked, verifiable Form 990 or audited financial statement. A pie chart is not transparency. Warning sign 2. Constant emergency campaigns instead of steady, documented programs. Warning sign 3. Vague outcomes with no verifiable specific proof of delivery. Warning sign 4. A founder whose personal brand and platform dwarf the organization's own. Warning sign 5. Any request to donate through a personal Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal account instead of the charity's official processor. If you ever see that, stop. That alone is enough reason to walk away. Warning sign 6. Married or closely related independent officers with no real separation of financial control. Before you give to any charity, spend 2 minutes, that's all it takes, on ProPublica's Nonprofit Explorer or Charity Navigator. 2 minutes could have saved 11 veteran families a lot of heartbreak, and it could have saved me $3,000. Have you ever been scammed by a fake charity, a fraudster, anyone who took advantage of your trust? Tell me what happened in the comments. I read every single one, and some of the best stories on this channel started exactly that way. If this story meant something to you, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next investigation.